Number one cause of death for the vast majority of human history has been starvation. Number one cause of death today is eating the wrong food. We're now at the point where 7 out of 10 adults, I think, are on the diabetic spectrum. The way I look at a Whole Foods or most grocery stores, you walk in and you hug the outside wall. You carefully hug the outside wall and you don't ever go in the middle. In the middle is the pit of doom is in the middle. The pit of diabetes, the pit of obesity, the pit of addiction is in the middle. The average adult will be on 2 diets a year for their entire life, according to a massive study that was published in the United Kingdom. And the crazy part is they will only last on that diet for 7 days. This one principle can turn somebody's health around all by itself. And that is this.
All right, welcome back to the Better Human Podcast. As usual, we have amazing guests. We've got Eric Edmeades today. How you doing, my man?
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. We've waited a long time to get you on the show. I think we've been chasing you for a bit. And today we're going to pick your brain and we're going to get all of your insight when it comes down to being healthy and, living this amazing lifestyle and being a better human and all that kind of good stuff. So just for the audience, I think all of you know who Eric is, but I'm just going to read out a little bit of his bio. I'm going to talk about also your new book and your book that's coming out as well. But Eric is an author. He's the host of Thrive Time, international speaker, influencer on topics from business to health, and founder of WildFit. Today, Eric is widely recognized as one of the most powerful, engaging, and entertaining speakers in the world, as well as leading authority on behavioral change dynamics, which I'm actually interested in picking your brain on that a little bit, and the art of creating genuinely transformational programs and experiences. His dream was not only to help people change their health, but more importantly, change the course of the rest of their lives. So for Eric, the vision boiled down to take care of yourself as fully as possible so that you can help those in need when they need it. I love that, Eric. I actually had that conversation earlier with someone about being the right kind of selfish, which is in order for you to serve other people and be able to give to other people, you really need to be looking after yourself. And the conversation I was actually having with her was more around her mental and emotional health. Anyway, man, really welcome to the show and thanks for being here.
Oh, glad to be here. I'll actually share something kind of very contextual. We've all heard the overused metaphor of put your own oxygen mask on, before you help others, which is an extension of that idea. But last year, my girlfriend and I and one of our daughters were on a plane and we're flying over the Atlantic Ocean. And about an hour off the coast of Ireland, we heard this beeping sound. And it's a beeping sound none of us have heard before in a plane. And I can tell you something. The only sounds you're happy to hear on a plane are sounds you've heard before. You don't want to hear new sounds, and this beeping sound comes on and then the captain comes on and makes an announcement and then the oxygen masks drop out of the ceiling and then the plane goes into a dive. And this is the announcement that the guy made. This is exactly it. Exactly the announcement. You ready? It went like this. Like, we couldn't hear. He was shouting so loudly that it was distorted. We didn't know, what language he was speaking. And then the plane went into a very steep dive. And in that moment, it's the end, right? I mean, it definitely feels like it's going to be the end. And I was just observing, like I was looking around the cabin and I saw every reaction from freak out, screaming, catatonic, just eyes open. It's the end. But as it relates to the oxygen mask metaphor, which I think is a very powerful metaphor for life, and it is, you're absolutely right. You have to be the right kind of selfish. There was a family in front of us, family of 4, the parents and their 2 young children. And one of the children was asleep when this all happened and the oxygen mask dropped down and the father did the right thing. He came down, he put his oxygen mask on, fixed it on. Then he grabbed over to the mask and the child and he put the mask on the child's face. The child started screaming and fighting. And it took the father everything to hold the mask on his face. And so I want you to just imagine for a moment, what if the father had been like a hero and decided that, well, I'll help the kid and then I'll put on my mask. Well, we know that would have gone badly for both of them. And so that idea of putting your mask on, it's not just a cliche. I watched it. I saw it. It was very real. And by the way, if I don't finish this part, you'll get all these people writing to you, what happened to the plane? Clearly I'm here. It landed in the wrong city and it turned out to be a cabin depressurization problem, but we did plummet for a full 6 minutes. It was a very, very scary experience.
I was going to say, what was that like? Besides scary, I'm sure the heart was pumping, your lights flashing before your eyes, but also for you to be taking that all in from an observing standpoint, like watching the family in front of you and seeing all these different people panic. I mean, what a considering the work that you do, what a little bit of a real life research and real time experience where you can see what really happens to the human being when they're in that fight or flight mode.
It really was fascinating. I will say this, that I am extraordinarily calm in those types of situations. I was in a casino in Nassau in the Bahamas when 4 guys walked in with assault rifles and started shooting, and I did not panic. I handled it like a pro. I actually spoke to an ex-SEAL who created a company doing corporate retreats and trainings in that, defense and that sort of stuff. And he and I were on a plane one day, and I told him the story about what happened. He goes, "How did you train yourself to do that?" And I said, "I don't know. It just, the gunfire went off, the glass was exploding, and all I did was drop into calm and handle it." And he said, "It's interesting because it can take months to train somebody to not freak out." And but what happened for me was really, like, when the plane thing happened, my immediate thought was, like, what is the most appropriate emotion in this situation? I was like, these are either my last final moments, so I don't want to lose them to adrenaline, or this plane is going to go down and I'm going to need to, and some of us might survive, and I'm going to need to be strong for that. So no kidding, I started putting my shoes on. And the people beside me, I remember distinctly, they looked over at me like, here I am putting my shoes on, and they're looking at me like, you're a crazy.
What the F is you doing? Where do you think you're walking? Right. But no, I mean, to have that sort of thought and that that planning, a lot of when I teach leadership, one of the key things we really nail down with people is the objective, right? Like, what is the objective of this interaction? What's the objective of the conversation? Because people will tend to focus more on what their preferences, their emotional need, that sort of reaction, right? And, when you can get people focused on the objective, things start to change, right? There's a sense of calm. Their frontal lobe is the one that's doing the driving, not their amygdala. And it kind of, as I was hearing you tell the story, that's kind of what popped in my mind, which is like, Eric really focuses on the objective in the situation. So, I mean, how, from a training standpoint, back to the Navy SEAL question, have you ever thought about that a little more, like your background growing up in South Africa? How much of that maybe lent itself well to you being, in quotations, calm in the scenario?
I did. Well, first of all, I didn't really spend. I didn't feel like I really grew up. In some cases, I wish I'd spent a lot more time there as a kid. I didn't really grow up in South Africa, but I was there a lot, and I was there. I mean, for example, I was in South Africa the day Mandela walked free. I was literally like in the country, feeling the energy of it. It was pretty special. But I think more impactful for the reason that I am calm in those situations now is that I feel like what happens to people is that events happen and their amygdala takes over and they start flooding themselves with adrenaline. Now, if they lived in prehistoric times, they would have had their adrenal system calibrated when they were young. When they were 5 or 6 years old, a hyena would have tried to kill them. And if they survived that, they would have seen what actual fear is. And so 3 months later, when their big brother did something mean to them, they would not dose themselves with so much adrenaline. But the challenge is that most people today have never calibrated their adrenal function. Like, they get a bill in the mail from the credit card company and they flood themselves with adrenaline over that. And I think that, in my case, I had a bit of a tumultuous upbringing. There was alcoholism and insanity and stuff like that. And so I had been exposed to genuinely terrifying things. And so that later on in my life, my adrenal system was calibrated. And of course, then as my life proceeded, I took on things that were scary. I do a ton of wildlife photography, and I stood in the middle of a park one day with 2 white rhinos running straight at me. And of course, the worst thing you can do if white rhinos are charging you is to run. And I know logically everybody knows that they shouldn't run, but logically doesn't apply when you're being charged by 2 white rhinos. So everybody runs. I didn't run. I just stood my ground, and they stopped like they were supposed to. But so I think that even as a young man, I put myself in those kind of situations, and that helped me to calibrate adrenals. What's the kicker is that little stuff can get to me. I'm not saying I'm a stoic. It's just that in in the tough stuff, I seem to drop into a level of calm, and then consequently, I take the right actions.
Yeah. As you're sharing the story, it reminded me, I once had this person work with me and, said, I notice every time there's like stress, you're very calm. And how do you do that? And I was like, I don't know. I don't think it's worth freaking out over things. Right. But yeah, I think in my upbringing, I did grow up in South Africa. You do grow up in a pretty, challenging environment, right? From a security standpoint. So you learn real quick. And as you're telling the story, I was teaching, some MBAs. This is about 2 weeks ago, and, we're doing conflict management. Anyway, some of the feedback came back, and one person said they felt bullied and attacked in the class. And the example that I use was harassing. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, man, like, are you this not sensitive, but like in real life, if you're getting this twisted and bent out of shape about, the facilitator and the effect, like, how are you going to handle some of the more bigger challenges in life? And, as you're talking, I just reflected back to this moment of thinking, the younger generations, we have had a lot more of a softer, safer, more comfortable life. There really hasn't been things to stress over.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a question there, or just more of a comment, but.
Well, frankly, it's directly related. Like, as we talked about, I just released this book, The Evolution Gap, and the evolution gap suggests that there's a gap that, and it started off as a narrow gap, and the gap's getting wider at an accelerating pace. And that gap is between our very slow pace of evolution and our incredible capacity for innovation. And of course, it's in our nature to try and improve and make things better. So, at first we have to hunt with our bare hands. Then we go, well, if we throw rocks, and then, we could sharpen the rocks, and, we could use sticks, and then what about the bow and arrow? You have to think about what an incredible technological advancement the bow and arrow is, compared to a spear, right? Like, that's a big deal. But at each step, what we were doing was making life a little bit more stable, a little bit more easy, a little bit more predictable. But doesn't there come a point where we've done that, where we've made life so easy that it's become dangerous? And I would say that that's where we are right now, is that we've made life so fundamentally safe that it's killing us. Like, here's a good example. Number one cause of death for the vast majority of human history has been starvation. Number one cause of death today is eating the wrong food.
Yeah, diabetes. Right. I recently heard this, actually. 50% of Americans are diabetic or have pre-diabetes. Right?
It's actually, we're now at the point where 7 out of 10 adults, I think, are on the diabetic spectrum. It's absolutely insane. And of course, it's an optional disease, and most people don't know that. In fact, many doctors, the co-author, I have another book coming out in March, and it's called Post-Diabetic, and it's a direct statement that diabetes is reversible. And this is fascinating. So I wasn't planning to write a book about it, because my company WildFit has facilitated hundreds, maybe even thousands of diabetic reversals. We didn't set out to do that, but it's what happened. And then one day I got this phone call from this guy. He's on my calendar. We have a meeting, and it turns out he's a medical doctor. He was an assistant professor of medicine at UCLA. He was 40 pounds overweight. He was on 10 prescription medications for diabetes, hypertension, and the related problems that brings. And then, and he's on his way to one of his clinics. He has 3 clinics in Southern California. He's on his way. He stops off at Starbucks to get himself a coffee because he's so sleepy. Because guess what? When you're in that health condition, you have no energy. Gets himself a large coffee, falls asleep behind the wheel of the car, gets into a car accident. 2 days later, he's in another rental car now because his car's in the shop. Stops off at the same Starbucks, falls asleep in traffic again, gets in another accident. That night, he's at home thinking, what right do I have to be a doctor? I mean, what right do I have to be a doctor when I can't even, heal thyself, right? And he found his way onto the internet, and he found his way to one of our classes, and he went through a 90-day process with us. And by the end of the 90 days, he had lost 40 pounds, got off 9 of his 10 medications. He got off the 10th one some months later, and he reversed his diabetes and hypertensive condition. And what was most shocking about this story is that he didn't know it was possible to do that.
That's crazy. I mean, I for me, it's so common. Food is medicine, right? And you, as per your story.
Let me offer you a little reframe. I just want you to think about something. Is oxygen medicine? Is water medicine? No, they're necessary. Uh, food is not medicine. It is required. I'm not saying there aren't foods with with medicinal properties, but the problem with the idea, and I hear it all the time, even like Mark Hyman, I consider him a good friend. He's a great doctor, but even he talks about food being medicine. And then I want to say, wait a second now, as long as you treat it like it's medicine, then you only need to eat it when you're sick. Like you only need to use it as a curative thing. Medicine is a curative thing. No, if you are overweight, you don't have an Ozempic deficiency. Right? What's happened is you've eaten the wrong food in the wrong seasons and you've created this condition. So it's not like, yes, if you are B12 deficient, then yeah, a ribeye is medicine, but only because you were deficient.
Right. And what I hear you saying is it's not a medicine. It's preventative, and it's a necessity, right?
Yeah,
it's
essential.
Yeah. So talk to me about that 90-day process. My ears perked up there. So, what does that process look like for someone, or for this particular doctor? Because that is life-changing.
It is. I think it's better to start with what it isn't. And what I mean by that is that when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was always very sick, and I was overweight, and I had terrible allergies, throat infections, digestive problems. I mean, I was suffering, and I was on medication all the time. And then some friends of mine kind of introduced me to some new food ideas. I went to a Tony Robbins seminar. I saw some different things, and I came home and started reading and doing a bunch of research. And I decided to undertake an experiment. And so for 30 days, I ate a little more of this stuff and a little less of that stuff. I made some changes, and I lost 35 pounds, and I reversed all the conditions I had. I was done. I was off all the medications. And by the way, my doctor had prescribed surgery. I avoided that surgery completely. And so that got me really curious. And that really started me on the path of intensive research. I spent, I don't know, years and years of reading studies and books, and then also doing field research, like going out to, I've now been visiting hunter-gatherer tribes in East Africa for something like 15 years. And, but here's the real crux of it, is that I stumbled upon two core principles that really can help people change their life. And the one was nutritional anthropology. And that basically is to say that there is a human diet. And while there are some small variances person to person, the reality is there is a human diet. And the second issue is that part of that diet is seasonal fluctuation. And that's something that's just completely lost on the industry, that humans evolved to first of all survive, and then to utilize the seasonal fluctuations we go through. But you see, the problem was I'd figured that part out, but I couldn't get anybody to stick to it. Like I would go, and somebody would ask me, because they saw how I changed, and they'd ask me for help. And I'd be like, okay, do this, do that. Here's the rules. Here's the schedule, and make that happen. And, a couple of weeks would go by. Like one really good friend of mine, he lost probably 35 pounds, similar path to me. He was on track, doing well. And then one day I bumped into him, and he'd put all the weight back on, and he was just back to his old habits. And so that really frustrated me. I was like, it's like the rules aren't enough. There's something else that needs to happen here. And I had at that point been doing a lot of studying of neurolinguistic programming and hypnotic language patterns, and generally transformation, what has to happen for a person to really change. And so I developed something called behavioral change dynamics, which is a methodology for creating transformative education content. That is to say, education content that is so engaging that you want to interact with it, but that you are left changed as a result of it. Rather than you having to memorize it, it becomes memorable. And so I developed that, and then I took what I knew about both nutritional anthropology and metabolic modes or seasons, and I put it into a very carefully constructed 90-day journey that people would start. And it's amazing. People come and do week one, and by the end of week one, they go, "Oh my God, I will never go on a diet again, ever." I now understand why none of that stuff ever worked. And they begin to understand their own psychology with food. They understand how the food industry is manipulating them and how to see through that. And so week by week, we take them through a combination of transformative exercises, nutritional upgrades, and education. And so by the end of the 13 weeks, they have completely transformed physically, emotionally, but more importantly, neurologically. And so that way they don't have to rely on a bunch of willpower, and they never have to go on a diet for the rest of their lives.
That's amazing. And do you take them into a different environment, or you give them the program and they're adopting the practices within their regular environment?
No, when I first launched this, I was living in Turks and Caicos, and I knew that it was impractical for me to do one-on-one coaching with people. Plus, at that stage, I was mostly coaching business. Like I had been contacted by Tony Robbins' company at one point, and they asked me to come and teach entrepreneurship at their programs. And so I did that one time, and Tony and I hit it off, and he booked me for like a year of those events, and it was just absolutely life-changing. And so after that, I got into teaching business and that sort of thing. And so when I first wanted to do this health coaching thing, my business manager said, "Are you insane? Nobody pays for that." Like, I put this 90-day process together, and I had the same 90-day structure for a business program called the Business Freedom Challenge. And people were happily back then paying $5,000 for 3 months of coaching with me in a group of 8. So it's a nice low cost for them and a nice like leverage cost for me. It was a great deal, but people wouldn't pay a penny over $1,500. So my business manager said, "Why would you do that? You're making a fraction of the money for the exact same investment." And I said, "Because it's important, because it has to be done." But the other thing is that, so the funny thing is, I never got into doing one-on-one coaching people because it was just not economical. It just didn't make sense. So I started off doing 1-on-8 coaching. So I was able to lower the cost for everybody, but also make it economically somewhat rewarding for me. And the first 8, it really worked. Then the next 8, then the next 8. And then a good friend of mine, Paul Sheely, did the program with his wife, and his before-after results were so striking that his PR company had to do a new photo shoot with him for the campaign they were on. And then he told his network about it, and then it just exploded from there. And so the distribution of it is that people can do the program as a study at home video program, all on their own, in their own house, in their own environment, or they can do it supplemented with one of our coaches around the world, which is how most people do it. But I'll say this directly to your question: it is not useful in the way that people might think it is to remove people from the environment they're in order to facilitate the transformation. Because when they go back to the environment where the old behaviors existed, they will return to the old behaviors. So in other words, if an alcoholic has an alcohol problem, you can't fix their alcohol problem by removing the alcohol. You have to fix the alcohol problem and then leave alcohol lying around. And it's the same thing. If I take you to some incredible retreat center and you have a problem with, I don't know, let's say you have a problem with Cadbury's Easter chocolate eggs or something, and I come along and go, "Well, I'm going to take you on this retreat center and we won't have any of them there." You'll go, "Oh, wow, I never had any." But you'll go home, and because we haven't dealt with that, you'll have them. And so in our case, because we do the transformation with people in their lives, then a year later, they're like, "It worked."
Yeah. Yeah. How much of this is like someone's commitment is obviously important, but their own self-belief. I would imagine that a lot of the individuals and clients that you're dealing with have that self-doubt, and it's not going to work, and I've tried everything. And here's the other side to that, which is we are inundated with information. It's like, who do I listen to? Do I listen to Dr. Mark Hyman? Do I listen to you? Do we listen to Gundry? Like, who? Or do we listen to all? Like, how do we sift through some of this stuff?
It is really tough. And so I have a couple filters that can help, and then I'll address the other question about self-belief. The first filter to look at is ultimate motivation of the speaker, of the source. So should I trust something I see from the CBC? No, probably not. I mean, I'm not saying they're a bunch of liars, but the truth is they have to pander to the government and they have to pander to their corporate sponsors. Should I trust CNN? Absolutely not. Should I trust Fox? No way. Like, no, you can't. But then you can take that same filter and you can apply it to people. So I'll use the 3 that you said: me, Steve, and Mark. And by the way, I know the 2 of them.
Both great guys.
They're both great guys. Steve has been a huge inspiration to me. I would just say this, that there came a point about 4 or 5 years ago where Steve became more interested in selling supplements than in solving the problem for people. And it's just my judgment, and I'd say that to him directly. So then I take a look and go, does that taint the overall message? I think it might. On the other hand, I don't know. I'm sure Mark recommends certain supplement stuff, but I don't see him with his own Gundry MD, like, Hyman MD. Mark, to me, is very, very passionate about affecting change in the quality of life of individual people. And I think that's really solid. And I would say the same thing about myself. I never started WildFit to make money. As it turns out, it's generated millions of dollars of revenue and it's created jobs everywhere and it's been fantastic. But the motivation wasn't about that. There are much more profitable activities I could be devoting my time to, but I do this because it's a passion. So I think looking at people's prime motivation helps. But then there's one last filter, and it is the ultimate filter by which all food science can be measured. And it works like this. Any food study, any fad, any principle, any detail that is shared with you, especially by some influencer, has to be measured against one rule, and that is if it violates what we know about evolutionary biology, it must be considered suspect. It must. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but it definitely doesn't mean it's right. So I'll give you an idea. My daughter, she's very heavily into the sort of carnivore diet, or what we call WildFit Spring. She's very into that right now. And, and she was very impressed when I went off and did Jordan Peterson podcast. Like she's all into all into that stuff. Right. So the other day she sends me a reel and I'm looking at this reel and this guy is, he's in his podcast posture and he's got his podcast microphone. He's looking all very official and he's pro carnivore. And he's like, look, the woman says to him, well, what would you say to the people who say that humans were hunter gatherers and ate both plants and animals? And he's like, that's just totally wrong. There are no facts in evidence to support that claim whatsoever. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And he goes on like this, like he's an expert. And then, of course, what I want to ask is, could you explain to me who domesticated tomatoes, potatoes, squashes, nuts, cashew nuts? Who domesticated chocolate? Yeah, like humans have had a long-standing relationship with plants. There is no question about that. None. And so what do? We take his fact, we weigh it against what we know about evolutionary biology, and then we realize that it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, but if you're not careful, you lean into that and you buy into it, right? Because it's sometimes the authority and the delivery, the speaker is so entertaining and passionate and committed, and the look is all there. So you go, I got to believe them, right? So let's go back to the carnivore diet. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, Jordan Peterson, Michaela, like they are big fans of it. And my wife is actually also, and Paul Saladino. And my wife are all talking about this. In fact, right before we started recording, my wife's running up to me with these these pepperoni sticks, like these meat sticks, organic. I mean, she's like, you need to eat one of these, and you need to be pounding these each day. So, is there truth to the carnivore diet? Is it all meat, no vegetables? Like, how do I sift through some of this?
So, something that happens in the diet industry is sort of a baby bathwater thing that happens. Is that something comes along and it works in a context, and then people decide to build a diet out of it, right? So there's one clue. And listen, I'm a big fan of Michaela. I've been really lucky. I got to spend quite a lot of time with Jordan this year. They're great people. I'm a big fan, not only generally, but I also really admire the stance that Jordan Peterson has taken to defend, I think, is Canada. And so I'm a big fan. But there's a clue even in what Michaela talks about, the lion diet. Right? Well, the lions are absolutely carnivore. There's no question about that. They are carnivore. Every aspect of them is carnivore, and we are not. So the fact that it's called the lion diet is kind of a clue. It would be like, I'm going to go launch a thing called the elephant diet. Well, what would that be? It would be herbivorous, right? Like that's what it would be. So what I would say is that imagine this spectrum where you have veganism at one end of the spectrum and carnivorism at the other end of the spectrum. What I would tell you is that if you told me I had a choice of living on one extreme island or the other, I would take the carnivore island all day long. And so what I mean by that is that I do believe that you largely can construct your life on a carnivore diet, and you can make it happen. And there's plenty of evidence in human history that demonstrates times when humans went generations without plants because they had to. Like the journey across Varinga into the Americas, where would they? I mean, there would definitely have been times where they would go either for months at a time, maybe even years at a time, maybe even generations at a time without access to plants. Here's another crazy thing is that if I drop you off in the middle of the Cascade Mountains somewhere, Alberta, BC, try and find a plant you can eat. But just try. Just good luck with that. But if I drop you in sub-Saharan Africa, they're all around you. Why? Humans evolved a relationship with those plants. We were there. There are 200 edible plant species that grow naturally in the African bush. They're around you all the time. And so we definitely had a relationship with plants. And I think that an optimal human diet involves the seasonal access to plants, the seasonal access to honey, and regular access to well-produced, ethically raised meat. And by the way, speaking of Saladino, Paul, funny enough, maybe you see Paul on JRE. He was talking about going off and visiting with the Hadzabe people and what have you. Mm-hmm. I was the one who took him. I took him there. Cool. I noticed he didn't mention that, Paul. Anyway, you could have told Joe.
You got to give credit where credit is due here.
but what was interesting is, I'll tell you where I met Paul, is that a good mutual friend of ours, one of the founders of Zumba, we were at Gerard Butler's house in LA, and we were at a party at his house, birthday party, I think. It was also my girlfriend's birthday. How about this? My girlfriend had Gerard Butler singing "Happy Birthday" to her. It was
that's
a
amazing.
Cool night, right?
I was going to say I like him in the movies, but to have him sing "Happy Birthday" is pretty cool.
He's a genuinely good man. I've spent some time with him. He's a genuinely good man. But now we're at his house, and this buddy of mine sits me down with Saladino, and Saladino is like carnivore. And I sat down with him and go, look, I get it. And if I had to choose, I'd go that way, but I don't have to choose. What I believe in is the functional evolved human diet. Like, what is that? And of course, what we know, there's no doubt about this, that humans have incorporated plants into their diet at various times, particularly seasonally. And so we started talking about that. And I told him about all my visits with the Hadzabe people over the last 15 years. And then I told him how the Hadzabe people react to honey. Well, what's Paul, talking about these days, right? He's like, and the carnivore community is very like, oh, Paul's not a purist. He eats fruit and he talks about eating honey. Well, I can tell you, as much as I might not be happy with Paul failing to mention to Joe that I was the guy, I have to say that as much as I love Sean Baker, I think he's fun and we've spoken and I love the work that he's doing. I happen to believe that he's taking a baby bathwater approach, and that humans have always had a relationship with plants. And so there's no harm in us having one now.
Yeah. Someone once said to me, they said, you can judge a healthy plate by the color on the plate and the fact that the protein is the size of your palm. Right. And, I've always thought about that, not so much on the sizing of the portions. Right. And I asked them to explain it, and they're like, well, technically you look at your palm, that's the size of the protein that you should have. Right. And your plate should be filled with color. I appreciated the fact that the plate should look like it's got color on it, because if not, everything's beige, right? And then we know there's a problem with that. Is there truth to that? Which is that's also a simple way of looking at it.
It's a great marketing, way to talk about it. I mean, I remember seeing this guy talk about health, and he's like, in the ancient times, you could tell whether a food was good for you because of the food signature. And if you cut open a carrot, what does it kind of look like? An eyeball. And carrots are good for your eyes. And if you cut open a walnut, what does it look like? It looks like your brain. And so it's good for your brains. And if you cut open an avocado, what does it look like? It looks like a pregnant woman with one seed in it. It takes 9 months so it must be good for pregnant women. And guess what? It's full of folic acid. It's all very cute and coincidental. But in the meantime, humans live for like almost all of our history without avocados. So clearly we don't need them. I'm not saying they can't be good, but, and so now let's go back to the color on the plate thing. Well, think of it this way. Can you imagine if you and I were zooming around in Canada in prehistoric times, and we just took down a mammoth? We're going to have plenty of color on our plate. I'll tell you right now, it'll mostly be bright red, but we're going to have like plenty of color on our plate. And I'll tell you what we won't do. We won't go looking for shit to put on the plate with the meat. We won't do that. We will not. Oh, Greg, my piece is a little bigger than the palm. Would you like the extra bit? No, we are going to eat every single bit that we can fit in before our satiation switch turns on. And it's not going to be, there's a reason that our stomach is expandable, because your stomach is normally about the size of your fist, right? But it is capable of expansion, and it's capable of expansion because our ancestors lived with feast and famine. So you kill a mammoth, you don't eat a palm-sized portion and go kill another mammoth the next day. You eat as much of it as you can right now, and you don't go get a side of potatoes with it.
So part of the answer here is to go back to some of the prehistoric times and keep it simple, right? Which is, and I like what you're talking about, which is that the seasonal side of things, right? And also the environmental, like depending on where you are and sort of how you're living, it it does make a big difference, right? One more question. It might sound like a silly question, but fruits in general, right? You get kind of both conversations, which is fruit's got tons of sugar in it and it's bad for you. And then the other side, which is, I mean, I could eat pineapple and fruits all day, right? But where does fruit fit in all of this?
You know, fruit's kind of complicated. First of all, let's talk about constant glucose monitors. You know, this is the fad now. You wear your constant glucose monitor and then, you know, it beeps if you let your blood sugar go too high or what have you. And you're supposed to keep your blood sugar low. Wrong. Like just wrong. Listen, you're supposed to keep your blood sugar low on a consistent basis, but that doesn't mean you can't let it spike on a given day. What do you think would have happened? Again, you and me, we're walking along in sub-Saharan. Have you spent much time inside Kruger?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, not a lot, but I've been there. Yeah.
I've spent probably a year of my life in there. And I want you to imagine you and I, we enter in at Berchendal and we're driving up and we get to like Biamiti camp and then we go out for a walk. And then all of a sudden it's 20,000 years ago and we're still standing there. And of course we're hunting and we definitely eat meat and all that kind of stuff. But then all of a sudden we stumble upon a tree and it's got these like reddish orange berries on it, which really do grow there. And then we pop one into our mouth because, you know, our parents taught us to do that. And it's so unbelievably sweet. It's gorgeous, sour and then sweet. And it's really amazing tasting. Are we going to go, oh, I've already had one, so I should take a break now? No, we're going to eat every single one that we can find. Why? Because if the fruit is on the tree, the drought is on the way. So we better eat as much as we can right now because we want to store the energy. So we're going to survive the drought. Like, no, fruit is not evil. Fruit has been a vital part of human survival, not just nice, but vital. Now we do have to consider the evolution gap, how we have used innovation to mess fruit up. So, you know, how big was a strawberry when you were a little boy?
Tiny.
Yeah.
Like exactly. These little tiny little things. That's now they are these
now
massive.
We modified them. And by the way, this is an important distinction about genetic modification that a lot of people don't fully grok is that, you know, genetic modification comes in 3 varieties, basically. The first variety is called genetic modification by natural selection. This is Darwinian natural selection, and it is genetic modification. And so over time, things evolve, but it takes like hundreds of thousands of years. Then you have the next kind of genetic modification, and that is genetic modification through selective breeding. And that's where you go, well, this plant makes big strawberries and this plant makes big strawberries, so I'm going to breed them together, and now we have bigger strawberries. And that has sped up the evolution of that species pretty dramatically. In fact, my favorite comic about this is you see this big alpha wolf staring into the distance where there's a man sitting by the campfire in the snow way out there. And the wolf is sitting there with snow coming down and he has a thought to himself and he goes, one night by the fire with the people, what could go wrong? Next picture, French poodle. That's what could go wrong. You know, your great grandchildren are going to be useless except for the stepdogs. You know, so, but then the third type of genetic modification is the GMO that we think of, and that's lab changed. But this is important to understand. Why is GMO so bad? And I can sum it up very much like this. For the vast majority of our history, we and our prey, plants and animals, evolved in lockstep with each other. So as a plant developed a new digestive enzyme blocker, we developed slightly better digestive enzymes. And this race was in parallel. The gazelle and the cheetah got faster in competition and coopetition with each other at the same time, right? That's evolution. Now we come along and in a lab, we go, bam, and we change that thing and it becomes something inherently different that we do not have an evolved relationship with. Therefore, it's got to be considered suspect. It's not a good idea. But if we take that same thought process and put it on breeding, it's no different. So when you were a little boy, a strawberry was this big. Now they're like apples. So what that means is that the average piece of fruit that we eat these days has a sugar load in it that is so far in excess of what our ancestors were dealing with that it's not funny. Then add to the fact that our ancestors had to put a significant amount of effort in to go and collect all that fruit. And now all you have to do is dial Uber Eats or something and just have it delivered to you. And then on top of that, now we've got insecticides and herbicides and pesticides and rubbishides all over these things. So there are definitely problems with fruit, but that's not to vilify fruit itself. It's to vilify our current relationship with it. And so the best way that people can, in my opinion, have a relationship with fruit is to have a very short seasonal relationship with fruit and get the very best possible versions of fruit that they can, in which case they can enjoy. I live here in the Dominican Republic. There are wild mangoes growing everywhere. When mango season comes in, I am eating mangoes. And guess what? I do gain a couple pounds during that season. And then, of course, the pounds come off when I move into the next season.
Right. As you said that, I'm in Costa Rica and I went to the store yesterday and you went around the fruit and half the fruit isn't available. Like there isn't pineapples and there isn't, there were some mangoes, but they were all sort of, quite, they needed to ripen.
Yeah.
But you looked around and I was reminded like, you know what? A lot of the fruit's just not available during this season because it's only going to be available next season.
That's right.
And I also was reminded of a story.
Your pancreas needs that rest.
Correct.
Let me just say something about diabetes here for a minute that I don't think many people have considered. It takes some 10 to 30 years to manifest diabetes. And there are many different influences. And I would say that seed oils play a role. And I would say that sedentary lifestyles play a role. But I would say that the single biggest contributor is our now non-seasonal relationship with carbohydrates. So where our ancestors would get carbohydrates for a very small window of time at a few points in the year, now we have consistent availability of it. But consider this, even with that consistent availability, and even with straining the pancreatic system and insulin resistance and what have you for so long, it still takes something like 10 to 20 to 30 years to manifest type 2 diabetes. And yet it's reversible in something like 8 weeks. Why? That's because the body was fighting diabetes the entire time. And after a decade or two, it finally lost the fight. And all you have to do is just give it the slightest little support back,
a little
and
nudge.
it'll recover.
Yeah. Wow. So, man, super interesting and so insightful. I was going to say the other story that I reminded of when I first moved to Canada, we went to the grocery store and you saw these apples. These apples were massive and green and perfect and shiny. And I'm looking like, what is with these apples, right? Versus the apples I grew up with were ugly and bruised and banged and a lot smaller. And that was my first exposure into sort of that North American food system, right? So, I mean, considering the fact that, the way the food industry goes today, how do we source proper food, proper meats, proper vegetables? I mean, the seasonal vegetables, that's fine. But, for the majority of us, where do they even begin? Like, what would be some factors to consider when getting meat? Like, do we go to the local organic farmer?
Go to your local butcher. Go to your local butcher and get to know him or her. Get to know them. Have a conversation. One of my WildFit clients, this is maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they went to their local butcher and they said, "Hey, I'd like to buy some sausages, but I don't want any fillers. I don't want any." And it turned out they were putting syrup in the filler mix, right? And she goes, "Can you do a custom order for me?" And he's like, "Yeah, we'll do the custom order for you." So, once every 2 weeks, she'd stop off and pick up a bag of her custom ordered whatever. So one day she called to verify that her order was ready. And the guy says, "We'll see you when you get to the shop. We don't have your order ready, but please come in anyway." That's funny. So she comes into the shop and she goes, "Why would you want me to come in if you don't have my order ready?" And he goes, "Because I want you to look at all of the sausages in the sausage area now." And she goes, "Yes." And he goes, "All of those are special order for you now." We were wondering why you were asking us to remove the syrup. And so we tasted some of the ones that we were making for you. And then we went and asked our father why we were adding syrup to the mix in the first place. And he said, "Well, because my father told me to do that." So they went and asked the grandfather and he goes, "I don't know." And, it tastes a little better or something. So they then had another WildFit client come into them. They explained to this woman asking for the same thing. And now the two people in a few weeks asked for the same thing. They decided to take it out. And so one of the things that's really important for everyone to understand is that there are two types of democracy. One doesn't seem to work and the other one does work. The one that doesn't really seem to work is the voting one. I'm not sure that really works very well anymore. Look, I'm not saying for people not to vote. I'm just saying it doesn't look like it's working all that well in the countries I'm observing. But the one type of democracy that does still work, and that is voting with your dollars, your pounds, your rands, your rubles, and what have you. Because if you stop buying something, they stop making it. And so what was interesting is because this woman asked to buy something different, they saw that we need to serve that. And they started doing it for her. And then they started doing it for everybody. So in that one little neighborhood, she moved to a place where the sausage production in that place went away from using corn syrup in their mixing. So I think the first thing that we want to do is we don't want to go shop at the giant, chains. Like, I'll make an exception for Whole Foods every now and again. Don't get me wrong. Whole Foods is wrong. I mean, 90% of that store is just a diabetic store waiting to happen. Like, it's wrong. But they do a great job of some of the produce. So if you can avoid, the way I look at a Whole Foods or most grocery stores, you walk in and you hug the outside wall. You carefully hug the outside wall, and you don't ever go in the middle. In the middle is the pit of doom is in the middle. The pit of diabetes, the pit of obesity, the pit of addiction is in the middle. But you just go around the outside. And of course, even at a Whole Foods, you can get good quality meat. So I say, go to your butcher. If you have a good grocery store that you trust, okay. But get to know your produce guy, get to know your butcher, and then talk to them about what's going on. And remember, they might not be making it exactly the way you want it, but if you start asking for it, they'll start answering to that. And if you stop buying the garbage, they'll stop making the garbage. I'll tell you what, if everybody suddenly agreed that the only way they would ever shop at McDonald's again is if McDonald's served Angus beef patties, McDonald's will switch to Angus beef patties.
Overnight. Right? Yeah. And, to your point about stores, there's a psychology to stores. These stores are set up in a way which creates flow, which flows you to the middle. It's not
scary.
Your feet just walk one foot in front of the other. And next thing you know, you're sitting at the nuts and you're sitting at the cereals and stuff. And
if you manage to avoid all that, they stack them at the checkout counter anyway.
Correct. I don't know how many times I've been in the store with my kid and we're at the checkout counter and they're like, Dad, can I get one of these? I'm like, hell no, right? In fact, I got mad at my mother-in-law the other day. She was visiting here and brought some candy for the kids. And I was like, sweets, no problem. But this massive bag of candy it was a diabetic bag of candy. Anyway, didn't say anything to her. It's the mother-in-law. She was visiting you. You smile and you grit. When she leaves, I'll throw them away. But yeah, back to it, that whole psychology and understanding that from a store standpoint, be more intentional and conscious. Like, I love your hug the side of the wall. I pictured Mission Impossible, right? Like scaling across the wall.
I always have Indiana Jones. I'm always thinking, I feel like
Indiana Jones, even better.
So I go in there, I've got my whip in my hand and I'm trying to avoid it.
Right. The giant boulder chasing you down.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
A pile of sugar.
Eric, I got to tell you, man, this is again, super insightful, but simple. I think, what I love about the conversation today is it's not complicated. Life doesn't have to be complicated. Food doesn't have to be complicated. Living healthy doesn't have to be complicated. I love your whole position of being a suspect about things, right? If it's that wonderful saying, if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck.
Let me drop one thing in that we didn't get to touch on it. You had asked, and that was, the role of self-esteem in the whole thing. And this is a very important issue. First of all, you have to consider that the food industry, I don't think the food industry is, has this like one particular evil person who's trying to kill us all. It's just capitalism has its faults. And one of the faults is that profit is more important than like contribution to society, unfortunately. So here we are having a food industry and they gotta serve their shareholders. So they're trying to get profitability in every way that they can. So one of the ways they do that is with genius marketing. So what do? They hijack our holidays and they hijack our emotional state. So we're at the point now where there are people living in Canada who believe they can't have Easter if they don't eat chocolate. I've read that part of the Bible. I went to a religious school. There's no chocolate. Like there was no,
there's no chocolate back then.
Yeah. And then of course, it wouldn't be Christmas without my Christmas cake and candy canes. Okay. I checked then too. The wise men brought frankincense, myrrh, and gold, not candy canes and Christmas cake. Like those things didn't exist. A smart marketer at some point attached those things to those holidays so as to establish them as traditions, so as to remove your choice about having them during that time. And then the marketers did the same thing with your emotional states. You're depressed, you should have chocolate. Give yourself a break today, you need a Kit Kat. You're feeling a little low, you need a 5-hour energy or a coffee at Starbucks. Like they've hijacked all of our emotions with intent. And then what they've done further is they've created a category for all the diseases they cause, and they named that category lifestyle diseases. And they named it that category with disgusting and manipulative intent. And it's so in our society now that we all use the term, but I want you to think about what it means. It means that it's your fault. Oh, you have a lifestyle disease. No, you don't. You have a disease that is the result of a disastrous and disgusting and unethical and disastrous in every possible way, food manufacturing, lobbying, and marketing business. Like, you're a victim. And I don't want to ever encourage anybody to act like a victim, but let's be really clear. So now the problem is that if you're a little overweight or you have a lifestyle disease, then what do you feel? Shame. And then if somebody makes a comment, they're fat shaming you, right? And what's crazy is you go in and order a mocha Kahlua mud pie at Earl's. Nobody says a damn thing to you. Order a salad. Oh, you're on a diet? Like we're all wired up badly, and it has a damaging effect on self-esteem. And here's why. The lower your self-esteem, the more junk you will eat. And so then you go into the diet industry, which is as bad as the food industry, because the diet industry is designed to erode away at your sense of self-esteem right off the bat. What do they want you to do? Okay, here's a bunch of rules, basically impossible to manage. Here's a bunch of calories. You need to become an accountant, albeit an Enron accountant, but you need to become an accountant about your calorie counting. And then you need to starve yourself, and you can't eat your favorite foods. And if you do, you're a bad, weak person. Oh, by the way, at this week's check-in call, please admit the stuff that you ate this week so that we can shame you for it. And now you got people. I have clients. They tell me they pick up their kid. They're on their way to pick up their kids from school. They stop off at the 7-Eleven or the Mac store or whatever it is they stopped off in their country, and they grab a chocolate bar. They walk outside, make sure there's no cameras, and eat the chocolate bar in secret. They're acting like alcoholics and drug addicts, and this is more common than you can possibly understand. It's everywhere. And so now your self-esteem is down because you ate that chocolate bar when you said you were on a diet. Now your self-esteem is down. So guess what you're going to eat the next day? And then you've gone on a diet, and the diet has eroded away at your confidence. The average adult will be on 2 diets a year for their entire life, according to a massive study that was published in the United Kingdom. And the crazy part is they will only last on that diet for 7 days. So why? Because they feel no progress and their self-esteem is eroded. What we do from day one is to support the rebuilding of self-esteem. We immediately start with the rebuilding of self-esteem, and we turn our clients into what we call the Sherlock Holmeses of progress. By the time they've been with us for 1 week, they see measurable results in their psychology about food. And they're like, oh my God, I will never diet again. And so it's that self-esteem piece that you asked about is absolutely vital. Again, to say it the way I said it before, the lower your self-esteem, the more junk, the more damage you will do to your body. The higher your self-esteem, the more you will preserve your body. And one way to prove this is, isn't it true that you will eat things that you would never feed your pet?
Mm. Yep.
Or you will eat things that you would never feed your own children,
yep.
Right? That's a low self-esteem problem.
Yeah. So how do you build? What are some of the things that you do to build self-esteem, or just generally, if we were to give people advice on, here's some tools, practices, techniques, whatever we want to call it, which will contribute to your self-esteem rising? And I'll preface this that one of the things that we understand in psychology is that your self-esteem will go up and will go down. We have a lot of impact on it, right? Our personality, but our confidence can grow and can lower. And that's very much affected by things like environment and current situation and stress. So, what are some of the ways we can bolster up or build up that self-esteem? I like the word build because it's not this instant overnight thing.
I'll give you 2 really big life hacks that I think are foundational, and they really genuinely work. The one is that your value as a human being can be summed up like this. If you lose everything, all you have left is your word. That's it. And if you're the kind of person who does what they say they're going to do, then people will come back into your life, and money will come back into your life, and opportunity will come back into your life. Done. So the problem with our word is that the whole idea of a man of his word or a woman of her word has been eroded away to nothing by Hollywood and by pop culture. If you're Bruce Willis and you're about to get on a spaceship to go and fight an asteroid, and you're saying goodbye to your daughter who's begging you not to go, and you say to your daughter, I'll be back, I promise, that absolutely means you're never coming back. Like, do you see this all the time? The hero promises, the doctor promises shit that can't be promised. So we've been taught that the word promise means I'll do my best. No, it bloody doesn't. Promise means come hell or high water, no matter what, I'm going to make this happen for me, for you, for everybody. And the hardest promise in the world to keep is the promise you keep to yourself. And it's a little easier to keep promises you make externally to other people. So one of the ways to work on immediate rebuilding and establishing of self-esteem is to, first of all, step one is to make a commitment to never break another promise. Never, ever break another promise. Step two, stop making promises of any kind. Like, just don't even make any. You've made a rule that you won't break any promises, so don't make any. Step three, when you are ready to make one only because you are 100%, come hell or high water, gonna make it happen, promise. So your friend says, are you coming to my party on Thursday? Yeah. Do you promise? No. I don't promise. There could be an asteroid by then. I don't promise that. It's not in my control to promise that to you. I promise you that I want to be there, right? But I can't promise you that I'll be there. I can't do that. Now somebody comes along and says, hey, are you going to get that assignment done? A client says, can you get that shipment to me by Friday? You look at the calendar and you go, you know what? I'm pretty sure it can get there by Friday, but I have to hand it over to Federal Express. I can't promise that. I don't know that FedEx is going to keep my promise. So what am I going to do? I can say, I promise you, I will hand it to Federal Express at 3 p.m. this afternoon. So you start making measurable, complete promises, small, one-time actions. Then, as soon as you complete that promise, no kidding, you will feel a little stronger. You will, from one. You just do. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. You do right away. Now you can make a habit promise. Just a short one. You can say, you know what? I'm going to go for 3 runs this week. You don't do that until you've built the muscle, though, because every time you break one, you almost have to completely restart. So you can't break them. And I did this exercise when I was 21 years old. And I would tell you now that the life I live today, which is pretty bloody extraordinary by many measures, is because I learned this game. I went an entire year, didn't break a single promise for an entire year because I didn't make any. I really didn't. But then I started making small incremental promises. And then one day I got so arrogant and full of myself with promises that I said, I promise that I will work out every day for a year. It was awful, Greg. I mean, it was so, I did it and I hated myself for it. And one way to think of it is that in a sense, the person making the promise is the captain of the ship. And the crew are the ones that have to fulfill that promise. So when you're making promises, you want to make promises that you know the crew can deliver on and the crew won't hate you for delivering on. And if you keep doing that, it'll work. Now, by the way, when I finished my year of workouts, the crew and the captain had a very strong mutual respect. The captain learned the crew will behave. But also the captain learned, don't punish the crew like that. And if you build that, it changes everything. The second one, which is really important to emotional state, and it's a bit of a complicated idea, but it is a mic-droppingly important psychological principle that it's mind-blowing. This one principle can turn somebody's health around all by itself. And that is this. Our ancestors learned to repeat successful behaviors. So if they experienced a big dopamine rush because they just ate a bunch of berries off this bush, the reason for that dopamine rush is not simply to reward you for eating the berries. It's to lock in the memory of the location so that you will find it again next year. That's what intensive emotional experience is about. Emotions are the glue that cause memories to stick. So you went over there and you ate those berries and you ate and you got all the dopamine and your body goes, oh, this, I remember where these are. And then it even says, by the way, how did you get to the berries this morning? Oh, I remember. I was feeling a bit bored. I decided to go for a walk. Now the nervousness system says, you know what? If we want to get berries, the first thing we should do is make the body feel a little bored, and it might go for a walk and get berries. So it learns your success strategies and records them as habitual behaviors and embeds them for you. It doesn't take 21 days to create a habit. It takes a strong emotional response to an effect to create a habit. So now you take a look at somebody at their office and they just had a really shitty day, and they go home and they take down a bottle of wine or they eat a bowl of ice cream, and their body goes, wow, this is incredible. What an incredible calorie payoff. And their body starts flooding them with serotonin and dopamine, rewarding them for what they did. And then the body goes, by the way, how did we manifest this? Because remember, the body doesn't know that those are devastating calories. The body just knows they're good. It doesn't understand. And so the body goes, how did we get here? And then the body goes, oh, we triggered a little depression. So from now onwards, when we want one of those things, all we have to do is trigger depression. And so the hack for that is never, ever reward a negative state with sugar, alcohol, and that kind of stuff. If you're going to eat those things, only ever eat them to celebrate outstanding results and such. Never use them as a reward. If you use them as a reward, your body will learn to create those negative states.
Yeah. I mean, how common is it to come home after a hard days of work and like grab that glass of wine or grab that sort of bourbon or whatnot? And it's, you're right. You're creating, in my world, we call them emotional markers, which are these memories and stuff. But I didn't know that. And how you just explained it, which was, it's reminding me, and it's the memory of how do I go back and get those berries again? Right? Like, what do I need to do? Man, super cool. I got one more question. This is a personal question about hydronated water.
Hydrogen. I don't know. Yeah, I know what you mean though. Like hydrogenated water.
Hydrogenated, like you get the water bottles and it like the hydrates the water and it's better than alkaline water. And I'm all over Amazon being like, which bottle do I buy? And I'm watching Gary Brecken talk about it, and I'm like, let me ask Eric about this. What are your thoughts about that? Any research or thoughts or comments?
Let's go back to the beginning of the podcast. In the beginning of the podcast, what do we say? Any fad, any biohack, any principle, any study that comes along and violates evolutionary biology must be considered suspect. Did our ancestors hydronate their water? No, they didn't. And they didn't alkalize the damn shit either. Like, I'm sorry, but what they did is they drank fresh water when they could find it from rainfall, from available water sources, from water they dug out of the ground. They drank it. And so, today we are messing with our water in all these kind of ways. And I'm not saying there isn't benefit to it. I mean, look, if somebody has a super acidic lifestyle, maybe they've got a bunch of acidic medications they're on, maybe there's some balance in trying to, alkalize their water and neutralize pH or something. But no, you know what water to drink? As natural as you can get, and stop messing around with the scientifically, the penta water with the penta structure and the alkaline Kangen, blah, blah, blah.
Kangen. Yeah. That's the other thing. It's like $5-6 grand for this machine. I'm like, do we really want it?
The only thing, the only thing I would recommend is a really powerful water filtration system that remineralizes the water. And that's it. No, none of this other, no, I'm not a fan. You can see I'm not going to land any sponsorship deals.
Yeah, listen, and truthfully, I mean, that's where my head is going. I'm like, fuck, here we go. Another sort of, water thing. Before it was alkaline water, and, before that it was
mineral water.
Kangen and mineral water, natural spring water.
Those things are good.
Yeah. We actually had this water the other day. It was from Italy, and it had, almost tasted like there was a salt in it. And, it was fantastic. It was great water. And that's why and that's what my buddy said. He said, like, by the way, this is really good water. Like, this is what electrolytes are, right? That sodium and what else? Sodium and
all the salts, magnesium. I mean, you got to have them. And by the way, if your water doesn't have them, then the water's going to leach those things out of you when you piss it out. Like it's like it becomes a negative function. So at the minimum, you want minerals in the water so that your water doesn't leach more minerals out of you.
Yeah, very true. That was, for me personally, that was a big, great. I'm glad I asked that question.
Good deal.
All right, man. I mean, we're top of the hour. Time flies. I'll keep you here for several more, but maybe we'll do a part 2 instead. Talk to us a little bit about your new book coming out. When's it coming? What could people expect? And of course, how do people get in touch with you about things like Wild Fit and maybe any other links that you want to drop?
Sure. Well, I'll start with books. The first book is called The Evolution Gap, and it's actually in pre-release at the moment. It's kind of an interesting story. I've been working on this book for years, and I've been giving talks under that title for years. And then I saw a press release that some guy was planning on releasing a book under the same title. So I went to the publisher and said, look, I want to release the book 1.5 years early. And they said, nope, we have a schedule. So I said, okay, can you release me from that book so I can self-publish it, because I want to get it out to do that. So that book is actually out. We haven't marketing launched it, but we just got it published and what have you. The fact is that it's available. It's actually going to go through a very heavy edit and get cut down by about 50,000 words. So this is the director's cut that's on Amazon right now. And the evolution gap, as I described earlier, exposes this gap between our very slow evolution and our capacity for changing our environment and our social structures around us. And it basically suggests that almost all pain, suffering, anxiety, stress, disease, and for that matter, social turmoil has its roots in that gap. And so the book helps you identify that and find solutions for it. I think, frankly, if I say so myself, it's an important book, not simply a good one. The second book is called Post-Diabetic. It comes out on March 26th. With Hay House and with the co-author that I mentioned earlier today. And it's called Post-Diabetic, an easy-to-follow 9-week guide to reversing pre- and type 2 diabetes. And I think anybody who's concerned about diabetes or knows somebody who is, or if you're a doctor, you got to go out and get that. It's in partnership with the Diabetes Reversal Institute that we founded to really solve this larger problem. And then I would just say, in terms of anybody who wants to revisit their relationship with food and end the diet cycle, and really change their quality of life, then I highly recommend checking out getwildfit.com and look at the programs that we have there, particularly the 90-day WildFit Challenge. It is our publisher Mindvalley. It's been the highest rated program on their platform for years. It has an 85% completion rate, which is basically impossible.
That's huge.
Online training,
because online training usually has a 3% completion rate. So the fact that you're at like 85% is renowned, like unbelievable.
Like that's not our numbers. That's the publisher's numbers. It's very, very effective. There's no question about it. We have like hundreds or thousands of cases of persistent weight being lost and diabetes being reversed and cancer into remission. And while I'm not promising it'll cure everything, what I'm saying is that your body wants to be healthy. And what we'll do is help you to set up a relationship with the food industry and your own relationship with food so that your body can do its job. And that way, no matter what you do to heal from no matter what you've got, you're giving yourself better odds. And so getwildfit.com is a great place to upgrade your relationship with food.
That's amazing. And for the audience, we're going to have all the links in the show notes and make sure that you have access to that. At the end of the episode, we come to the most important question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow? But maybe I'll sort of adjust that with you and say, what do you think we could all do to have better health and be a better human tomorrow?
Well, the truth is, it's the same answer. And people often come to me, and because I'm often on business podcasts as well. And then I'm often on, people talking to me about public speaking and that kind of stuff. And they always ask, like, what's your number one rule or your number one tip for being a great parent or your number one tip for being a great business owner or whatever? And the truth of the matter is that the answer is be healthy. The answer is, develop a great relationship with your body, with food. That's not to say don't have, junk food ever. It's just to say have a great relationship with food and have a great relationship with moving your body. And I can tell you right now that the vast majority of the mental anguish that people are going through comes down to a bad relationship with food, a messed up metabolism, and inactivity. And by the way, this is super important, not only for your own quality of life, but you influence people. And so, the truth is that every time you make a responsible decision about your diet and about your exercise, you inspire other people to do the same thing. And I'm just going to say this, as controversial as it might be. I can tell you, I crunched the numbers out of the UN. The countries that had less than 18% obesity in the COVID pandemic barely experienced COVID. The minute, and it's not a linear relationship between obesity and COVID, it's a stepped linear relationship. What that means is countries below 18% had less COVID deaths than traffic accidents. The minute a country had 18%, boom, it was a major problem. And so I would put to you that when you say what can everybody do to make things better for everybody, you know what? Get your health in order. You have a social responsibility to do it on top of your own quality of life. If we were back in the 70s to have prevented obesity and diabetes, there would probably not have been a pandemic. There wouldn't have been enough people to spread it. So, and whatever's coming next, I'm saying be as healthy as you can be to protect yourself, but also the ultimate herd immunity is a strong natural immune response from the population. This is not an anti-vax statement, by the way. This is a first line of defense, last line of defense statement.
I agree with that. Man, love that. Eric, you are a gentleman and a scholar, and I really appreciate you being here. Today was insightful, as I've mentioned a couple times, but you're bang on with stuff, man. And I love that answer, which is be healthy. I think I couldn't agree more. All right. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you thought it was valuable, go ahead and share this out to someone else. Go and follow Eric. Go and check out his books. Get the director's cut on Amazon right now, which I'm going to ask you for a signed copy after this episode. And stay happy, stay healthy, make right choices, and we will see you next week.